All right, let's jump right into one of the sharpest, funniest, and honestly, most brutal books ever written. We're talking, of course, about Voltaire's Candide. And in this explainer, we're going to treat it like a philosophical stress test for one of the coziest, most comforting ideas you can imagine. So, this thing was published way back in 1759, and you have to understand, this little book was an absolute bombshell. Voltaire, who was a total giant of the Enlightenment, just packed it with this razor-sharp satire, and he aimed it right at the heart of the intellectual and religious establishment of his day. It's a wild, globe-trotting adventure, for sure, but underneath it all, it's asking a really, really serious question. And here it is, the central question of the whole thing. Is this world, with all its chaos and suffering, is it really the best of all possible worlds? Now, I know, it sounds kind of absurd to us today, but believe me, this was a hugely influential idea back then. And Voltaire? Well, he decided it was time to put that idea to the test. So let's start with the hypothesis. What exactly was this philosophy that got Voltaire so worked up? Okay, meet Professor Pangloss. He's our hero, Candide's tutor. And this quote, this is his whole brand of logic right here. He looks at the world and just sees perfect design everywhere. Noses? Oh, they were obviously made to hold up glasses. Legs? Made for pants. It's all cause and effect, sure, but it's twisted into this ridiculous pretzel of self-serving nonsense. All right, so here's the formal definition. Pangloss is basically a caricature of a real and very popular idea from a philosopher named Leibniz. It's called philosophical optimism, and the core idea is this. A perfect God could only create the best possible world. That means that everything, and I mean everything that happens, no matter how awful, is somehow a necessary piece of that perfection. It's like the ultimate everything happens for a reason argument taken to its absolute extreme. And this is a perfect example of how that grand philosophy actually works on the ground, in Candide's little bubble. It's all just circular logic. The castle is the best because the baron is the greatest. And how do we know the baron is the greatest? Well, just look at his amazing castle. It's this completely closed loop, this way of thinking that's never, ever been challenged. Until now, that is. Okay, on to the experiment. This is where Voltaire takes that neat and tidy hypothesis and just smashes it against the messy, brutal reality of the 18th century. And he uses our poor hero, Candide, as his philosophical guinea pig. And the experiment begins immediately. First, for the crime of kissing the baron's daughter, Candide is literally kicked out of his perfect little world and thrown into the real one. Almost instantly, he's tricked into joining the army, where he's flogged nearly to death for just taking a walk. It's this brutal, senseless introduction to how the world actually works, the neat theories from the classroom just slamming into the chaos of real life. Then he's shipwrecked and somehow survives the Lisbon earthquake of 1755. And you have to remember, this was a real historical catastrophe that killed tens of thousands and shook the faith of an entire continent. For Voltaire's audience, this wasn't just a plot point, it was a raw, shared trauma. And what's the official response to this act of God? Well, the Inquisition decides to hold a public ceremony and punish some heretics to stop more earthquakes from happening. And of course, Candide gets flogged again. And this is the moment. After being brutalized by both man and nature, the philosophy finally starts to crack. Candide asks this simple, absolutely devastating question. You see, he's not arguing logic anymore. He's speaking from pure, raw experience. If this unending nightmare is supposed to be the best possible reality, he can't even begin to imagine how horrible the other ones must be. So let's break this down a bit. Why does this philosophy of optimism fail so completely when it actually smacks into the real world? Well, just look at Pangloss. Right after the earthquake, with the city in ruins around them, this is what he comes up with. He's not comforting the injured, he's not helping dig people out of the rubble. Nope. He's philosophizing, trying to come up with some detached pseudo-scientific reason to make this immense tragedy fit neatly into his little system. But, and this is Voltaire's favorite word, his favorite weapon, reality always interrupts. Because while Pangloss is rambling on about sulfur deposits, Candide is literally crushed under the rubble, bleeding, and he has a much more immediate concern. He just needs help. He needs some practical care. And that's the central conflict of the entire book, right? Abstract theory versus real, tangible human suffering. And this, right here, is the final nail in the coffin for Pangloss. After everything he's been through, sickness, slavery, even being hanged and surviving, he basically admits he holds on to his theory not because it's true, but because, well, he's a philosopher. And for him, the system, the idea itself, is way more important than what's actually true. And just to really hammer this point home, Voltaire gives us a glimpse of a completely different world, the mythical Utopia of El Dorado. This is a place where gold and jewels are just, pebbles on the ground. There are no courts, no prisons, no priests because none of them are needed. It's a land of pure reason and contentment. And when you put that right next to the brutal reality Candide has been through, the contrast is just staggering. It's a peek at what the world could be, and that makes the world as it is feel even more tragic. Okay, so if philosophical optimism is a complete failure, then what's the alternative? What's the takeaway? This brings us to the famous final conclusion of Voltaire's whole experiment. At the very end of the book, Pangloss gives one last, super long-winded speech, trying to tie all the horror and suffering together into one perfect chain of events. And Candide's response is this iconic line. He doesn't debate him, he doesn't argue, he just cuts through all the noise with a simple, powerful call to action. So, what does that actually mean? To cultivate your garden? Well, it's a rejection of all those big, abstract, useless philosophies. It's about focusing on practical, tangible work, the stuff that's right in front of you. In a way, it's an antidote to that kind of toxic positivity that tells you to just accept suffering because it's all part of some grand plan. Voltaire is saying, no way. Instead of trying to rationalize all the world's problems, find the small patch of it that you can actually improve. Your work, your community, your own backyard, and get to work. And that's ultimately where Voltaire leaves us. He takes this huge, cosmic question and throws it right back at you and me. After showing just how foolish it is to follow systems that ignore real suffering, he challenges all of us to stop trying to explain the world and start actually engaging with it. To stop looking for the silver lining in the earthquake, and instead to get down there and help clear the rubble. So the question he wanted every reader to answer then, and the one we can ask ourselves now, is pretty simple. What garden will you cultivate?